Hello, friends, and thank you so much for purchasing this series on how to budget your wedding. I am Wedding Planner Morgan, and I work with 40 to 50 couples a year on budgeting their wedding, on bringing things together for folks. And I just want to share what I know and the process that I take my clients through when we're building for their wedding. So in this series, we're going to start with what we're talking about today, which is setting your overall budget number and how to align your priorities with your partner. So after you get engaged, one of the first things you need to do is figure out what your overall guest count is going to be. And you may be thinking like, why do I need to know the size of the party? We just got engaged. But if you're going to set your budget, you need to know how many guests you're expecting. A budget for 100 guests is a whole lot different than a budget for 300 guests or 50 guests or no guests. You get the idea. Then you're also going to need to decide the season based on the market of where you are. So are you getting married during high season? On my market, that is June, July, August, September. Or are you thinking maybe you want a winter wedding, or maybe you want a shoulder season wedding? Are you open to Fridays and Sundays, or a weekday wedding, or are you strictly Saturdays? And the most important reason why you want to have these discussions as you're setting your wedding budget is knowing what you are and not flexible on. If you are not flexible on time of year or on day of the week or something like that, then likely you are going to find yourself at the top of your budget in almost every category. Which, of course, is actually 1,000% fine. You just want to make sure that you are aware of that as you're going forward and booking, and you are prepared to have some sticker shock as you start this journey. The next thing you really want to do is, if you are involving your family in the financial support of this event, you're going to need to sit down and have a conversation. And it's not awesome. It can be really uncomfortable to do, but I promise if you have it at the very beginning of this process and everybody is aware of what you're taking care of and how you're moving forward with it, it's going to eliminate a lot of that stress that could pop up later on. And when you're talking to family, one of the ways that I like to suggest folks approach that conversation is, rather than being like, how much do you want to spend on this event, or what are you willing to contribute to this event, maybe talk to them about providing specific services. So are you interested in helping with or taking on the cost of the bar? Are you interested in helping with or taking on the cost of the photographer? I find that when you gear things toward a tangible thing that family member can then look at on your wedding day and be like, oh, I did that. It's a much more easier and a much healthier way to have that conversation than basing everything on numbers, because you're going to go through a lot of numbers and they're going to be higher than you expect. I mean, I don't think I've ever worked with a client that is like, oh yeah, that came in about where I expected. I think we're always sort of surprised and sort of blown out of the water by what these events can cost. And you also want to ask yourselves, what are you two paying for? What items are you going to take on the cost of? Do you have a ceiling of what you want to spend? And maybe you are paying for this thing entirely yourself, but I do not by any means recommend having everything paid for by a parent or other family member. This is your first step on your adult journey, right? Maybe you've bought a house, maybe you've done some of those other things before, but maybe you haven't. And maybe this is truly the first step of you being an adult financially. And you've really got to showcase that. If you are asking your family members to put in a certain amount, but you are not meeting that with some additional support of your own, even if it is smaller, that's going to cause a lot of problems for you along the way too. Then after you've kind of opened up this conversation with everybody, I want you to hit the Google machine and I want you to type in what the average cost of a wedding is in your market. Nationally, the average cost of weddings is about $30,000 for about 150 people. In my market, I find that is not true. I find that it is more like 30 to 35,000 for about 100 people. In New York, obviously, or San Francisco or Chicago, and a lot of those other large city markets, it's probably going to be twice that for about the same amount of people. So I think it's important to kind of get an idea of what you are looking at, and do not let that discourage you. If you see that amount and you're like, whoa, that's absolutely out of our wheelhouse, that's not going to be what we can do, that's okay. That doesn't mean we're not going to have a wedding. That doesn't mean it's not going to be beautiful. That doesn't mean it's not going to be an incredible day. But you need to know when you start the journey what you're up against. Because if you are looking at venues that appear to be in the top, of your market, you want to know what the average cost of all of those things is going to be when it all comes together. And then here's the hardest part. You want to take that average cost of whatever it is in your market. Say you live in Nashville, the average cost is, I don't know, $25,000. You're going to want to add an additional 10 to 12% onto that as a cushion. And the main reason why we want to do that is because our goal is to come under in every category, but we want to be solidly prepared if we have some last minute expenses, if something comes up on, or we decide we need to add more photography time or something like that. I'll talk about this a little bit later in the series too, but it is very important to have a little bit of a cushion so that if you do end up at the ceiling of this budget, you are not scrambling and feeling really stressed out if you need to buy 2 more cases of wine that you weren't planning on or something like that. You need to have a little bit of wiggle room. And after you figured out what your overall number is, so likely you will be somewhere in the $20,000 to $40,000 range if you are like below 100 people. Likely you will be upwards of that if you are like 150 plus, 120 plus. Of course, there's exceptions to that, but that is just what I see in my market all the time. So once you kind of nail down where you would like to be, then also you need to know where it can go. So saying like, okay, we really are going to try to stick to the 25 mark, but we have 35, or we really want to stick to the 15 mark, but we have 20 or something like that. I think you should always know what the absolute ceiling is and what the goal is. Then after you have your final number or your goal number and your flex number, what you're going to want to do is sit down and talk with your partner, not anybody else. This does not include family, right? You want to sit down with just your partner and talk about priorities. Is the venue the most important thing to you? Is photography the most important thing to you? Is food the most important thing to you? Those are the 3 places you're going to spend the most money. And you got to kind of figure out what is the most important to you. Are the flowers the most important to you? And what you should do is sit down with your partner and each rank 1, 2, 3. Most important, second most important, third most important, and then read them to each other. Note what those differences are. Note what you have in common, and then attack the ones you have in common first. And then after all of that, you can sit down and look at what you've spent on the most important things to you and reallocate as necessary for everything else. Coming up in part 2, I'm going to share my budget template with you guys. We're going to go through what percentage of budget I expect you to spend in each one of those categories to kind of help you get started. And then we're going to move into the order in which I suggest you book your vendors, so you can make sure you stay on top of that the entire time. I hope you enjoyed this first part. I'll see you again soon. Mwah, 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 mwah.